Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. If there's one thing it seems many Republicans still haven't learned from the 2016 election, it's this. As angry as Republican voters are with the Democrat Party, they are equally angry with the Republican Party. How is it that Republicans still don't understand the message, even after 4 years of Donald Trump? And why are voters unhappy with the Republican Party? Because so many Republicans lack the will to fight. See, what the press doesn't usually get, and the thing that Mitch McConnell and folks like Liz Cheney and many other Republican leaders don't understand, and also those who classify themselves as never Trumpers still don't understand, is this. For most voters, it's not about Trump. It's actually about the will to fight. And the reason that Trump resonated so deeply with Republican voters, and let's be clear, he always had really high approval from the GOP and the base, the reason people enthusiastically supported him, though, is because Trump fought. I remember 2016 being in New York City with Fox, and I was going over exit polling data, and one of the top three things that I saw, it didn't matter where it came from, it didn't matter if it came from the West or the Northeast or the South or a flyover nation, one of the top three things that people really liked about Trump, and it was verbatim, he fights. Says it like it is, and he fights. That's why people liked him. That's why they very enthusiastically liked him. So not only was Trump willing to throw a verbal punch, he volunteered to take punches in return, and he paid a price for it. And to voters, he was this outsider who fought harder for their interests than the self-appointed bouncers of the GOP ever did. There's also a reason why Ron DeSantis is so popular with Republicans. It's very similar. He holds firm. He holds the line. He's not bullied by the press, and he's one of very few politicians who naturally has a similar disposition and similar manner, whereas politicians who copied Trump's style and they just merely looked fake and their manner contrived. DeSantis is transparent. He says what he believes. He's willing to use New York or D.C. as the focus group for how he's not willing to use them, in fact, for the focus group of how he should run Florida, like when he opened his state up, despite all of the fear-mongering and the misrepresentation of data from the media and really people in government and bureaucratic agencies. You know, everyone screamed that everybody in Florida was going to die. Florida was probably just going to fall off into the ocean. Actually, I would credit Ron DeSantis as a big reason why we even reemerged from lockdown in America, considering most of the Western world really took a lot of time to reopen. And in fact, some of them are still locked down to this day. DeSantis, though, he was rewarded for holding the line. And next to Trump, Ron DeSantis comes up in every single Republican conversation. Republican voters simply looking for leadership with backbone. They're tired of Democrats dictating the talking points. They're tired of legacy press misrepresenting or exaggerating everything, whether it was the Russian hoax or the Steele dossier or the FISA court abuse or the cleanest election in history, the back and forth over lab escape theory. What about the DOJ that never actually got around to indicting FBI agents that spent a good deal of their time trying to undermine a free and fair election, as noted by a recent IG report from the Office of the Inspector General, which was published on the very 20th of this month? We can't expect objectivity from many in legacy press. Objectivity seems to be dead. But the least we can expect is for the Republican Party to take a page from Trump and go on the offensive and recognize that maybe people are hesitant about the vaccine, not because of political pettiness, but because maybe they haven't received a return on the investment of their tax dollars in the form of data and transparency. Data being the big issue here. But there still is a good portion of the Republican Party that seem to fight on their heels. And the latest example of this is this weird shift in messaging on the vaccine and people who are either unvaccinated, vaccine hesitant, etc. This is Mitch McConnell just yesterday. Watch.
97% of the hospitalizations in the country for COVID are unvaccinated people. It never occurred to me after 3 highly effective vaccines were developed in under a year that we'd have difficulty getting Americans to take the shots. But that's obviously where we are. I want to underscore in the strongest possible manner I can, and I say this with some authority, as you all know, as a result of being a polio victim myself and being very aware that it took 7 decades to come up with 2 effective polio vaccines. This was done in under 1 year. These shots need to get and everybody's armed as rapidly as possible, or we're going to be back in a situation in the fall that we don't yearn for, that we went through last year.
Now to Republicans like Mitch McConnell, voters see them changing their tune on the vaccine. And here's another sidebar to this. With all due respect to Mitch McConnell, and there are a lot of things with which I agree with him. I agree with him on a number of issues. There are things I disagree with him on, but I also think that it's a little bit unfair to compare vaccines that have been around for a really long time and that have really gone through the test of time, and you've seen the side effects, and it's kind of a different generation. It's very unfair to make that comparison to a vaccine like the one that we have today, particularly when you incorporate mRNA technology, which is brand new. This is not anything that we've done on such a wide scale before. And furthermore, I mean, this is also, it lacks still FDA approval. Now, that's not saying that it is in any way less virulent or less potent, or it's a knock on the efficacy of the vaccine. I'm just simply noting where it is in the process of obtaining FDA approval. It's an unfair comparison, and it really omits all of those factors that I just named. Here's the thing. Millions of Americans, they're vaccine hesitant because they feel like the government hasn't been transparent, or maybe they make silly comparisons, or they're not forthright with data. And it's not because Americans haven't heard the sales pitch. I mean, you can't blame vaccine hesitancy, for instance, on Trump, which I hear quite often, because Trump is actually the one who sped up the process of these vaccines, sped up the process to get them to market via Operation Warp Speed. Now, if it were actually about Trump, and if Trump voters were just mindless dolts that hung on to his every word, then every single Trump voter would have gotten the jab because Trump himself endorsed the vaccine. Joe Biden explained how, because of Trump, he himself was vaccine hesitant. He did this during the 2020 general election. I played this audio on my radio program earlier today. He wasn't called anti-vax for that sentiment. Kamala Harris, now vice president, said she wouldn't, and this was during the general election cycle. She said that she wouldn't take the quote-unquote Trump vaccine. That's how it was always labeled by so many people in press. She was not denounced as being anti-vaccine. People who claim vaccine hesitancy today, though, in the very same manner as Biden or Harris, they're shamed as murderers. No, this is about 75 million some odd people who are hesitant, or who maybe they have rejected the vaccine, and maybe they have legitimate reasons and maybe they don't. But somebody should probably speak some truth and shed some light on some of these reasons, right? Somebody has to. I mean, I wish that these Republican leaders, specifically those who seem to not understand what their voters are trying to communicate, I wish that they would understand this. And you can't just order people to get the jab. Here's why so many people are hesitant about this. Many are vaccine hesitant because they're nervous about taking what they think is an experimental vaccine. And by the way, I'm going to refer to it until such time as it is approved by the FDA. It's not a pejorative. And by the way, that may be approved as soon as August. It's simple as that. They just feel some caution is in order. Some people are not getting vaccinations because they feel that the science and data has been anything but transparent. I'll hit that note a lot. Whether it was on lockdowns, on masks, the low-cost therapeutics that social media will actually censor if you even say like the name of some of these drugs, the lack of transparency, censorship, all of this makes people are made hesitant to take the vaccine because of this type of behavior. Now, some are hesitant because maybe they've had the coronavirus themselves and have natural immunity, and they're healthy and they understand that, there's really scant argument that the Delta variant is deadlier. Granted, it's way more contagious, but deadlier. So maybe they perhaps choose their natural immunity, which is their choice. Some are rightly skeptical of our health experts like Dr. Fauci, who disregarded the lab escape hypothesis. He kind of fudged the herd immunity percentages based on some polling and admitted that he was not truthful about masks. But yet he still represented and presented as the gold standard of credibility, despite many feeling that he has been discredited. Some people who are vaccine hesitant, some know others personally who have had adverse reactions to the vaccine. Some know people who have gotten coronavirus even after they've been vaccinated, like me. And many find it incredibly odd that the government is just hell-bent on vaccinating children who have essentially a 0% chance of fatality, absent comorbidities. And they're concerned about things like myocarditis and pericarditis. And this is occurring in some young men. And honestly, the lack of frank discussion about this and the suspension of accounts, if people even entertain the idea of a discussion of this, well, that just makes them even more hesitant. There are adverse reactions that we can't talk about without presenting it as being the rule rather than exception. Stay with me here. Some people reject the vaccine because they notice that normalcy never seems to return Despite the vaccine, despite the masks, it was 15 days to slow the spread to nearly 500 days, and it feels like there's never really a light at the end of the tunnel, just fear, fear, and more fear. Speaking of normalcy actually never returning, Israel put masks back on kids, even though 70% of the population received vaccinations. Australia and New Zealand are in perpetual lockdown despite the numbers of fatalities per day in singular digits. Some see all of these questionable incentives to get people to take the vaccine, like free French fries and college scholarships and vaccine lotteries, and they wonder, why are these gimmicks even needed to convince so many people to get the jab? I mean, why can't people just put the same effort into explaining data, sharing information, maybe having daily press conferences? Many see vaccine passport systems rolled out in countries like Greece and France and the UK, and they worry that a vax passport will put the power to control your freedom of movement all in the hands of somebody else, like the government. And that strikes them as a very dangerous idea because they see it as an invasion of privacy, and it's not even being discussed. But most people, and this is really important, most people are hesitant because they just reject on principle the idea that the government should have the power to force them to inject something in their arm, take a vaccine, and they look at it for a virus that has a 99% plus survivability rate. They believe it's their body and it's their risk to take or not take. The hospitals are not overwhelmed, and if the vaccine is safe and effective, then anyone who's taken the vaccine is safe from any unvaccinated person. That's not how vaccines work. Your vaccine doesn't work just if it doesn't not work if someone else doesn't have their vaccine. That's not how any of this works. We're never going to get to zero transmission, and we're never going to eradicate a virus either because it's a virus. You're not going to kill the virus. What you have to do is be proactive, and you acclimate and you adapt. We never did it with the flu. We don't stop the entire world for influenza. Now, the point is that there are very legitimate reasons that people have to not get a vaccination, and they're not merely political ones, and it's really disingenuous and malicious for it to be passed off that way. And just for a flashback, remember Kamala Harris's reason for being vaccine hesitant? Watch.
If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
I don't know many or any actually vaccine hesitant people who say that the main reason they don't want the jab is because Biden's for it. But that is the vice president of the United States during the election saying that she wouldn't take it because of Trump. But nobody shamed her. It's her choice. I just wish that courtesy was a two-way street. And by the way, I want to state again, I'm not against getting vaccinated or against vaccines at all in general. I mean, honestly, I am not against masks. I'm not against vaccines. I'm not against any of that. I don't like the government telling me that I have to do something. And I also believe that this is a personal choice. Whatever happened to my body, my choice too, by the way. It's something that can't be made. This is a choice that cannot be made through coercion. And for 75 some odd million people, they feel that the government has not made the case convincingly to them. And that we have a legacy press and we have Democrats and government and these bureaucratic agencies. And now it seems like several Republican leaders, like Mitch McConnell, that they're making veiled threats of lockdowns. That only increases people's anger and frustration and honestly resolve to further distrust people and entities and not be vaccinated. I mean, clearly some Republicans still don't get it, but there's such a sudden shift from the GOP on everyone getting it. And I will say this, Republicans have never been anti-vax. Some of them definitely are, but to say that that's the universal rule, no, that's not true at all. Chris Hayes of MSNBC, he's even noticed the language shift. Here's his tweet saying, quote, "The sudden uptick of vocal GOP support for vaccinations is very welcome, but it only highlights how bizarre the absence of it has been." End quote. Okay, well, it hasn't been bizarre if you've been paying attention, if you've actually seen what people have said. I think that that's a narrative that maybe perhaps you made up and believed yourself. But it's not bizarre. Good heavens. People are told that they're weird or murderers or they're maggots, right? Like a maggot, but like MAGA, MAGA style. You're responsible for the pandemic. I mean, you're a killer, a modern day leper. For shame that you unvaxxed people ask questions. Apparently questions that either nobody wants to answer or they can't answer. I wish we had an answer on that. No, they say just do it. It's safe. It's effective. It's all you need to know. And remember, we'll punish you with lockdowns if you don't do what we tell you and stick that needle in your arm and the arm of your child. Shame on any Republican leader who does not take the legitimate concerns about the vaccine from its constituents seriously. It's a huge, important, this is more than just the vaccine. This is also about what the government can and cannot tell you to inject. And this is a core reason that people vote for Republicans in the first place. You're supposed to value privacy and personal autonomy and individual liberty and be able to make decisions about your own life and your own health. I don't think any of us like where all the shaming and censorship is going. And that McConnell, of all people, doesn't understand this. It's a worrisome sign. I hope the Republican Party doesn't follow the trend. Out of everybody in the Republican Party, it should be Ron DeSantis that they're listening to and not that rhetoric that we just heard from Mitch McConnell earlier. No, they're in a very, very, very interesting moment. And I really don't think that the Republican Party needs to present itself as being tone deaf if they don't think that mothers that are told that they must keep masking and even vaccinate their 5-year-olds in order to go to school, for instance. I hope that they're not downplaying those concerns of mothers that you guys need the suburban women vote, by the way. This is also how you find yourself on the receiving end of a populist sledgehammer. People are tired of the media directing the talking points. They're tired of weak Republicans who are more afraid about how they appear in Mediaite as opposed to standing up for their voters. And by the way, since Mitch McConnell brought up polio, let's take a quick look at polio because it is incredibly revealing. Now, I said a little bit earlier that there's a huge difference in something that's been tried and true and something that's brand new, like what we're dealing with right now. In 1952, of the 57,628 polio cases reported, 3,145 people died and a shocking 21,269 experienced paralysis. That means 42% of the people who got a case of polio they were either paralyzed or they were killed. Now, again, 42% of all of these cases led to death or paralysis versus less than 1% of all coronavirus cases causing death in people. And unlike coronavirus, kids were more adversely affected with polio. And when a vaccine came around for polio, you did not need to convince anybody to take it because the genuine threat was quite clear. And despite polio's devastating and very consistent effects, none of the draconian policies instituted for coronavirus were implemented. I mean, if you think lockdowns are normal, listen to this from the American Institute for Economic Research, quote, "Though there was no cure and no vaccine, there was a long incubation period before symptoms would reveal themselves. And while there was a great deal of confusion about how it was transmitted, the thought of locking down an entire state, nation, or world was inconceivable. The concept of a universal shelter-in-place order was nowhere imaginable. Efforts to impose social distancing were selective and voluntary. In an earlier 1937 outbreak in Chicago, for example, the superintendent of schools, not the mayor or governor, by the way, closed the public schools for 3 weeks and encouraged learning from home. In many localities, when there was an outbreak, and depending on the level of fear, bowling alleys and movie theaters were closed, but not by force. Church services were canceled sporadically, but not by force. The churches themselves were never shuttered," end quote. Maybe it's this generation in which so many would accept all of this policy overkill. Maybe that's the one that's bizarre. That's what's bizarre. That we would steal senior years from millions of high schoolers. I mean, huge life moments that define you later on in your adulthood. That we would allow people to die alone. That we would create a faceless world where we all become anonymous cattle rather than unique individuals. People who have a constitutional right to speak, move, and worship. And last time I checked, there's not a clause in the Constitution that none of our rights apply in the event of a pandemic. This is a legitimate position, and even though it's unpopular, it is the correct and logical position to take. And so the GOP should not minimize the devastation of these coronavirus mitigation policies, the depressions, the suicides, the 90,000 overdoses last year, the endless masking of children, the growing cry for forced vaccinations for kids who are not at risk. So where is the Republican Party's outrage? Why are they lecturing Americans instead of the agencies who failed to make the case to the public with transparency, consistency, and more data? The GOP gambles with 2022 if it loses the will to hold the line for its voters. Have you forgotten the principles that you were elected to defend? Do you care about what the vast majority of your voters think? The GOP can't expect the Ron DeSantis's and Rand Pauls of the party and a few others to do all of the heavy lifting. So take it from someone with their ear to the railroad. The midterms are coming, your voters are watching, and if you sleepwalk through some of the greatest attacks on personal liberty in American history, and you do not stand up for voters' constitutional rights, if you do not fight for your voters, you have no reason to expect voters to fight for you. So, up next, why can't the left leave cake baker Jack Phillips alone? Well, he joins us next with his attorney, Kale Warner, and discusses the relentless attacks on him and also what that means for being able to control your own labor and free speech. Stay with us. Masterpiece Cake Shop owner Jack Phillips was in trouble again, got in trouble again because the left insisted that he bake yet another cake, and now he's going back to court. It's like that he lives in the courtroom at this point. He should probably just take his bakery there. Jack Phillips and his attorney, Kale Warner, join us now to discuss this never-ending persecution from the left. Jack and Jake, so good to see you. And Jack, I have to say, I think you're a modern-day American folk hero, and I'm very glad that you're standing up not just for your right to freely practice your faith, but also control your labor and for your free speech as well. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so I was reading in March of, just a few months ago, March of this year, Jack, you're going back to court again. How many times is this for you now?
I'm not sure how many times it is, but this is our third lawsuit. Even though I serve everybody who comes into my door or calls me on the phone, but I can't create every message that people ask me to create.
Right, and that's really that's really the point of all of this here. And I've read some other interviews with you, and I know that you're very consistent in terms of what you will use your free expression and labor for. I know that you sell pre-made cakes or birthday cakes, etc., to everyone. But when someone is asking you to use your time and your creativity and your expression to create a cake that is counter to either to your beliefs, that's where you draw the line. That could even, you could interpret that for cakes to celebrate divorce, couldn't you?
Yeah, there are a number of cakes that we don't create. We knew right from the beginning, before we opened the shop, that we wouldn't create cakes that celebrated Halloween or cakes that were anti-American or racist or cakes that would denigrate or insult anybody, including people who identify as LGBT. It's always the message of the cake that we determine, never the person who's ordering the cake.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a very good point. And I've told people on my radio program before, I am an imperfect Christian, and I've talked about this often, but I like Halloween, but you would actually turn me away if I went to your bakery and tried to order a Halloween cake.
Yeah, it's always the cake that's in question, never the person asking for it. And there are many other cakes, including in our latest lawsuit, the person who's suing me asked me to create at one time a cake with Satan smoking a marijuana joint. And that's not a cake that I would create for you or my mom or for Jake here. It's just not a cake that I would create. So it's the message of the cake.
Yeah, and Jake, I want to bring you in about on this as well, because this is as much a free speech issue as it is your right to be able to freely practice your faith and live out your faith wherever you go and not just hang it up in the closet and only take it out on Sundays. Talk to us a little bit about the significance of free speech in this case, because ultimately that's what's being argued.
That's exactly right. Issue in this case and many other cases that we litigate here at ADF is one question. Does the government have the power to force creative professionals to express messages that go against their deepest beliefs? And we believe the First Amendment says the answer is no, the government doesn't have that power. And that's especially true in Jack's most recent case. You might remember that on the same day the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear Jack's first case, a Denver attorney called Jack up and asked for a custom pink and blue cake to celebrate a gender transition. But this wasn't the first time that attorney called Jack. Back in 2012, this attorney emailed Jack, calling him a bigot and a hypocrite, and then tracked Jack's case for years, ultimately leading to that phone call. And what we're seeing now is government officials and activists really weaponizing the legal system to punish people that they disagree with, and the Constitution forbids that.
And that's a very, very good point, because this is weaponizing the legal system and ultimately going for a false sense of justice. Jake, I'm going to ask you this. The inability to say no, I do not define that as freedom. That's
exactly right. Yeah, the principle that we're advocating for here doesn't just protect Jack Phillips, it protects any creative professionals. For example, the government shouldn't have the power to force a website designer who identifies as LGBT to promote a website promoting traditional marriage if that goes against their beliefs. The government shouldn't have the power to force anyone to express messages that violate their core convictions. So yes, this is very much a freedom of speech issue.
Now, going back to Jack, Jack, are you the only bakery in the Denver area? Apparently, are there no other bakers at all anywhere near you?
No, if memory serves me correctly, in the Supreme Court briefs, there were 67 other bakeries who advertised to the LGBT community. This attorney, though, that was not good enough, and we had a mediation, a face-to-face meeting, and then later, under oath in the courtroom here in March, this attorney promised me that if I were to win this case, or if it were to be dismissed on any technicality, that I would get a phone call the very next day with another cake, and we'd start all over again.
Wow, and that's, I mean, that, and you obviously, this might be kind of a rhetorical question, but I would imagine this makes you feel persecuted. This would make anyone feel persecuted.
In a way it can, but at the same time, if this person came in and asked for a birthday cake or a regular cake that I would sell to anybody else, I would gladly sell it to this attorney who's prosecuting us. It's always the cake, it's never the person. And these freedoms, they travel together, the free speech and the free exercise of religion. If we lose one, we lose them all. And so we need to fight for these things. And that's what ADF is here to help.
That's a huge point. And Jake, to that, I didn't realize that in the United States that you were expected to forfeit your right of free speech or your free practice of religion and your free expression just because you enter commerce. So when did this precedent get established? I mean, that's what really ultimately it feels like.
Well, that's not how the First Amendment works here. It actually protects people, just like Jack, who declined to express messages that go against their core convictions. But what we've seen is an increase in government officials and activists trying to twist laws or manipulate the legal system to punish people that they disagree with. And this is imposing a heavy cost on creative professionals around the country. For example, ADF also represented a Washington florist. Her name was Baronelle Stutzman. We just appealed that case up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the court denied to hear that case. And she, like Jack, declined to create custom floral art to celebrate a same-sex wedding, even though she had served this gentleman for nearly a decade. And the cost to her is potentially very great. She stands to lose nearly everything because the court did not hear her case. So these cases, they have a real impact for Americans around the country.
Yeah, they really do. And I've spoken with Baronelle Stutzman before, and her case is really heartbreaking. And you touched upon a very important point, the customization, the custom work that is required, because ultimately that it goes down to you using your labor and your speech. And I know that there's been a lot of comparisons to indentured servitude. If you're viewed by the government as having no right to say no or decline. And Jack, to that point, you have pre-made cakes available, you sell those to everyone, but when you are specifically asked to create a custom cake, tell us what goes into that, because I see video clips of you creating these things. I mean, you're very artistic. You spend a lot of time putting that together.
Yeah, we sit down, especially with the wedding cakes, we'll sit down with the bride, with her mom, with her family, her sister, whatever, good friends, and we'll design the cake with them. We'll find out what the details are that they want to portray. And, besides the flavor, the color, and those kind of things, but they're all important. But the design of the cake is incredibly important. This is the biggest day in this woman's life, and we want to help her celebrate it as the best way that we can. And so then after we take all that information, then we go back into the back and we create the cake, and we use our hands, we use our talents, we use a variety of tools to create an expression that is unique to this event. And to be forced to create that cake for an event that goes against my faith would just be wrong, and the courts got it wrong.
Yeah, and Jake, to that point too, does anyone have the right to commandeer someone's labor and demand that they perform a service for them or create something for them against their will?
Not when it comes to compelling speech. Courts have been very clear that the government does not have the power to compel anyone to express a message that goes against their core beliefs. And what we've seen in recent years is actually an uptick in courts recognizing this. ADF has represented clients all around the country, and among those are a painter and a calligrapher here in Arizona who, like Jack, couldn't create wedding art to celebrate a same-sex wedding. And we took that case all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court, and that court made the right call and said that the government couldn't force them to create art that goes against their deepest convictions. And we won a similar victory at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. So I think what we're going to see as time moves on is that more and more courts are going to recognize that this is a fundamental freedom that protects everyone, not just people on one side of the debate.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Jack, what do you say to people who say, well, why don't you just bake the cake and just avoid all of the problems and avoid the court cases and being smeared and having the ratings for your business downgraded? What do you tell those people who tell you that maybe doing opposite of what you believe is easier?
I don't think it would be easier because I'd have to live with the consequences later on. But like I said at the beginning of this, my wife and I decided which cakes we could and could not create, and that would always be based on the message of the cake. And those lines that we drew in the sand have not changed. And so these rules, they're trying to change them around us and force us to use our creativity to produce cakes and other items that go against that faith. But these freedoms are worth fighting for. The government shouldn't have the right to compel anybody to speak a message that goes against their faith.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I noticed your book behind you, The Cost of My Faith, and you get into that in with your book exactly what you and your family have had to go through. Tell me a little about what this experience, because this has been since 2012 now, if memory serves. What has this years-long experience, what has this been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a little over 9 years now, and it's been up and down throughout different times. The court took away our very lucrative wedding business that because they said that if you're going to create wedding cakes, you have to create them for all weddings, including weddings that go against your faith. So we lost that wedding business, but at the same time, we've met a great deal of people who support us, including when we were at our trial back in March, a former gay activist testified on our behalf that I create cakes for everybody, but I can't create every cake that everybody asked for. And that was really encouraging to hear that testimony in the court under oath.
Yeah, I was reading about that. It was a gentleman named Mike Jones, and he appeared at your trial, and he had been a customer of yours, and he had shared in a deposition that he's placed numerous orders with you, including birthday cakes, etc. What really gets me, and I'm going to go back to Jake here for a moment, and because this has already gone up to the Supreme Court, and I've had a lot of people, when I first shared the headline of Jack going back to court again in March, everyone's like, well, how is this possible? How is this happening again? The Supreme Court weighed in. Explain that to folks really quickly, Jake, if you would.
Well, in Jack's first case, the U.S. Supreme Court didn't even need to reach the free speech issue, and that's because the free exercise violation was so clear. The Supreme Court ruled that Colorado officials had acted with impermissible hostility against Jack and his faith. And the court cited two reasons for that. One, Colorado officials compared Jack's plea for religious freedom to some of the worst things in our history, such as defenses justifying slavery and the Holocaust. But the second reason, the Supreme Court said, was Colorado officials treated Jack worse than every other cake artist in the state. State officials had already allowed other cake artists to decline to create cakes that express messages going against their deepest beliefs, but they declined that same freedom to Jack, and that kind of discrimination is wrong. So that's what happened. Unequal. That's what happened in Jack's first case. The Supreme Court left open the free speech issue, which is why we're litigating in part this most recent case, but we're confident that the court's going to uphold Jack's right to live and work according to his deeply held beliefs without fear of government punishment at the end of this.
My goodness. I mean, it is, I can't even imagine what you all have been through. And it's sad, too, that you also had to stop doing wedding cakes as well. I joked about this a little bit on air when I was discussing your case. I was saying, well, what does Jack Phillips do to his cakes that make them so delicious that everybody is demanding that he give them a cake no matter what? And I mean, really, when they ignore every other baker in the area. So, like, apparently your cakes are incredibly special. So, I mean, tell us about it. I have to know what makes it so special that people are demanding this, you know, and even going to this length to get it from you.
You know, I'm not sure what people see in, you know, making them special and that they want to come and get them, but they have for almost 28 years now, and we're proud of that. We enjoy meeting with the people and working with them to try and design cakes that go with their celebrations, you know, the way that they want them to. The person who's suing me doesn't see it that way. In the mediation, this person also told me that the only thing that would be satisfactory to resolve this is for me personally, to create the cake for him. So it wouldn't matter if every other bakery in the world made this cake for this person. I'm the one who has to do it, but I can't create a cake like that goes against my deeply held religious beliefs like that.
Yeah. How long will you fight, Jack?
Well, the next step is the Colorado Court of Appeals, and we'll see where we go after that. Hopefully the Court of Appeals will reverse the decision that the lower court made.
Yeah. And we'll be watching that case as well, because and as you were saying too, Jake, I've seen so many of these cases, whether it's a t-shirt printer or bed and breakfast owners. I mean, people should be able to have the right to determine their own expression and labor, and here it is, 2021, and I mean, these are very different. I mean, it's a very consistent issue. It's very easy to, hold the line on this, and it's very easy to understand. People should be able to exercise these rights. Jack Phillips, Jake Warner, thank you all so much for joining us, and Alliance for Defending Freedom, appreciate what you all do over there. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
So up next, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joins me to discuss the fate of the Texas legislature's funding and, of course, Paxton's latest victory as it relates to DACA, Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, instead of arguing with randos on Twitter, why don't you just enjoy your coffee? Enjoy your Black Rifle Coffee, whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over or cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission. Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way, wherever the summer takes you, hopefully without Wi-Fi. So head to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. So with Texas representatives MIA, the fate of the legislature's funding could be up to the Texas Supreme Court. Here with the latest on this, and also to discuss his victory on a DACA ruling, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joins me to discuss. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for your time today.
Hey, I hope you're doing well. Thanks for having me on.
And yes, doing very well. And so, how is this gonna unfold with the legislature? Because I mean, you got funding for the staff that's going to be running out. How is all of this gonna end up being determined?
It's like a movie that we never thought we'd be in. It is running out at the end of the month. Our new cycle starts September 1st, and so I guess the Democrats have a decision to make. Are they going to take care of? They've already ignored the will of the people. They've already ignored their other fellow representatives who've shown up and given up their time to be down there and volunteered their time. But are they also going to ignore their own staff and not come back and deal with the issues that they're supposed to deal with? If they don't care about them, then they don't care about them, and they won't be funded.
Yeah. So how does this work with the Texas Supreme Court? Because if they're not there to determine legislature's funding, so then this goes to the Texas Supreme Court, and then they would make that determination because they broke quorum and fled.
Yeah. So if there's a lawsuit over this, that lawsuit would be ultimately go to the Supreme Court when they take it, and they would have to make the determination as to whether the governor has the ability to veto that particular section of the budget. I don't know why he wouldn't. He has the power to veto other sections of the budget, so I don't know why he couldn't do this.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about that and whether or not he could, and if he could, why hasn't he done that at this particular point? Do you have any? I mean, why do you think that might be?
Well, he already cut out part of the funding for these legislative staff. Legislators don't really make any money, so it's hard to cut their salaries when they hardly make anything. But he has already cut the funding for the legislative budget, so they're already, unless they show up and there's a change during the session, their staffs are going to get cut off along with every other staff in the legislature. Even those who participated in showing up are going to be punished because the Democrats have decided they don't care about this.
Yeah, well, there you go. I wanted to ask you, too, about your victory in the DACA program. For those who don't know, the court concluded that Texas had standing, that the Deferred Action Childhood Arrival Program, that's what we saw come up under the Obama administration, that it was, in fact, subject to judicial review, and that the federal government they didn't follow the protocol. They didn't follow the law, really, and when they were issuing DACA. So congratulations on that. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the border?
You know what? It's a huge win. I mean, it sends the message to President Biden. This was under Obama that the DACA was created. And what happened under Obama was he just made up law. He said, okay, I don't like the fact that we have these immigration laws that prevent people from coming to this country. I'm going to create my own terms and conditions, and I'm just going to implement them through the federal government. That's what he did. So we sued him. And the reason this is so important, even if you agree that all of these people should be allowed in and given amnesty, it's not in the power of the president to do that. So if we let any president do that, we are ignoring the Constitution. We're going to lose our ability to have representative government. The states will lose their power, and it will become we'll have a president who has all this power, who can issue edicts, and we're all just sitting watching. We're no different than a dictatorship or some type of oligarchy.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because this wasn't even justifiable through any kind of executive action. I mean, I understand that the president of the United States enjoys some of that privilege keeping within the Constitution, but the determination from this, even though the Obama administration, as you know, because you were leading the fight on this, they argued that this was perfectly fine, legal, it was within his purview, but it wasn't, and that's what ultimately was determined.
Yeah, and that's really important. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, whether you might even love this issue. You might say this is the best thing President Obama ever did. But we can't let any president, because if you say that about a President Obama, that he should be able to do this because it's great policy, then we also would say President Trump should be able to do the very same thing. He ought to be able to make up his own laws. Well, I don't think anybody would like that either. And so that's not the way this country functions. We vote for people, they debate things, they pass things, and the president has to sign those things. And if that's not the process, we're living in a different country and we don't have a constitution.
Yeah, and it definitely, talking with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, definitely is not the kind of the process. We were just talking a little bit ago about the state legislatures with Texas Democrats. One of the things that I've heard, from so many people who listen on radio, who comment about this whenever the show plays across Texas or elsewhere in the country, because so many stories have been done now about those people who've entered the country illegally. There are people who are put on planes and flown elsewhere. Who's doing that, and who's paying for that in Texas?
So my guess is, since they're not being transparent, I've been to the border. I've been in these detention centers. I've been to the Donna facility. I've been to the one in Midland. I've been to the one in San Antonio. I never get a straight answer on where these people are going and who's paying for it. My guess is we're all paying for it. And
you're the Attorney General of Texas, and they're not telling you?
No, they don't want us to know. They don't want you to know. They don't want me to know. They don't want us talking about it. They don't want us asking the question. They do not want to be transparent about what's going on in the federal government, what's going on with these people, because guess what? If it were public, I'm guessing most people wouldn't like it.
Oh, that's a very good point about that. Well, we're going to continue watching this and see what I would love to. I love transparency, right? I was just saying yesterday, transparency in an era where we need it the most, we do not have it. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Of course, you too. Folks, we have a lot more in store. Keep it here. Well, Eric Clapton, in true rock and roll fashion, is rebelling against the establishment. Thank heaven somebody is. Here's what Clapton had to say after Boris Johnson and the British government said that the UK will impose vaccine passports to bar unvaccinated people from pubs and social gatherings, saying, quote, following the PM's announcement on Monday, the 19th of July, 2021, I feel honor-bound to make an announcement of my own. I wish to say that I will not perform on any stage where there is a discriminated audience present. Unless there is provision made for all people to attend, I reserve the right to cancel the show, end quote. That's pretty rock and roll. And exactly one rock and roll legend now has spoken out that I'm aware of against, really it's kind of a vaccine quasi-apartheid that is being imposed in the country after country, and surely maybe will be imposed here if we don't push back. And here's more from a Yahoo article Yahoo! Quote, Clapton has been releasing anti-vaccination and anti-lockdown statements. By the way, sidebar, I am so done with the anti-vaccination. It's anti-government coercion, and I'm really done with the conflation. But the piece says he's been issuing these statements and songs for close to a year now. And in December of 2020, Clapton joined fellow classic rocker turned anti-vaxxer Van Morrison on his song Stand and Deliver. And the song features lyrics including, do you want to be a free man or do you want to be a slave? And Dick Turpin wore a mask too. In an earlier release, Clapton detailed a disastrous experience with the AstraZeneca vaccine for which he blamed propaganda for pushing on him. The musician continued on revealing that he suffers from peripheral neuropathy and should never have gone near the needle, end quote. Clapton's solo act, not really solo because Van Morrison said it too, makes you wonder, was all of the other rock and roll rebellion from everybody else in the last 50 years, was it a put on? The violations of norms, pushing back on the establishment, trashing the hotel room type stuff. Bruce Springsteen demanded vaccinations from his entire audience. And originally he said that don't even bother coming to his shows unless you were getting vaccinated. Maybe he can sell merch for Pfizer or J&J or Moderna, right? Those would be cute t-shirts. And then of course you have the Foo Fighters, who I like. I like the Foo Fighters. Who doesn't like Dave Grohl? They forbade all unvaccinated fans from attending their recent concerts, regardless if the reason was for the absence of vax was due to natural immunity or legitimate health reasons. Vax or unvax, you do you. But it seems pretty establishment to join certain members of the government in shaming or excluding your fans because government officials chose politics over simply sharing hard data. And apparently it's only cool to be anti-establishment if you're like the Dixie Chicks and a Republicans in the White House, because then it's safe. I didn't realize that being rebellious depended on safety. Isn't that kind of antithetical to rebellion? Lectures about politics from the stage, all of that, all of the causes that so many bands told us we were supposed to care about because they bravely cared about them. And looking back, maybe standing up for those causes wasn't actually brave or rebellious after all. I mean, maybe it was just part of a shtick. Maybe it was just all about showing off the virtue of these musicians who wanted to take their stands in public, but only if they knew that those stands were popular. So Clapton's statement against this form of, like I said, this quasi-apartheid, this vaccine quasi-apartheid, says a whole lot. It says that, he actually is being rock and roll. Thank heavens it's still out there. He respects his fans, so just, he's gonna pick up a guitar, grab a mic, and say things that the establishment needs to hear. That's the rebellious heartbeat of rock and roll. So here's to apparently one of the last true rock and roll legends, Eric Clapton. And I have an idea too. Maybe he could start like a tour for the unvaccinated in America. He'll bring down the house. Oh, I can already hear legacy press screaming about that. And maybe when he plays Change the World, maybe he can start a grassroots movement to do exactly that. Stop shaming people and instead shame the people who haven't been transparent and forthright. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night and don't bend the knee.